So welcome to the next panel of witnesses. So for the Privy Council, got Ms. Marcia Jones, Director General Strategies and Planning, and Rima Amoui, who's the Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet Senior Personnel. And then for the Treasury Board Secretary, Mr. Karsten Quell, who's already come before as Executive Director of the Official Languages Centre of Excellence Office of the Chief HR Officer, and also Karim Adam, Director Oversight and Compliance, Official Languages Centre of Excellence. And then for the Canada Border Services Agency, Holly Flowers Code, Vice President, Human Resources. And as you know, I give you 5 minutes, that's a maximum, so that you can make your presentation. And then we'll go into rounds of questions with interactive answers. So we'll start with Ms. Jones for 5 minutes. Sorry, Ms. Amoui. Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, good morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the lands on which we are gathered are part of the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. On behalf of my colleague and myself, we appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss official language obligations related to Governor and Council appointments. I will provide you with a brief overview of the role of the Senior Personnel Secretariat within the Privy Council Office in helping to manage and coordinate the process for these appointments.
Include heads and members of commissions, boards, agencies, administrative tribunals, crown corporations, as well as deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers leading federal public service departments. Bilingualism is a fundamental responsibility of federal institutions, and governor and council appointees play important roles in carrying out the mandates of these organizations. Les nominations par le
Governor and Council appointments are made by the Governor-General on the advice of Cabinet and on the recommendation of the responsible minister. Since 2016, the government has used open, transparent and merit-based selection processes to support ministers in making recommendations for these appointments. This approach is intended to support the identification of highly qualified candidates who meet the skill, knowledge and experience criteria of a position, and who also reflect Canada's diversity in terms of linguistic, regional and employment equity groups.
These are application-based. Positions are advertised through notices of opportunity on the Privy Council Office website. Federal departments conduct outreach to attract qualified candidates. Applications are assessed against the advertised criteria for the position. And following interviews, a list of qualified candidates is provided to the responsible minister who recommends a candidate to Cabinet. The Privy Council Office provides the necessary support for this process. En vertu de la loi sur les compétences.
Under the Language Skills Act, agents and officers of Parliament who are appointed by the Governor and Council are legally required to be bilingual prior to their appointment. The language proficiency of candidates for those positions is assessed during the interview stage of a selection process, and if necessary, can also be assessed through language testing provided by the House of Commons.
Governor and Council appointees that are not subject to the Language Skills Act, the notices of opportunity posted for those positions note the preference for bilingual proficiency, and individuals are asked to include in their application their ability to speak and understand their second official language. Applicants are interviewed in the official language of their choice and may be asked to answer one or more questions in their second official language to assess their bilingual proficiency. The Privy Council Office tracks bilingual proficiency in the Governor and Council community and monitors trends to help support decision makers. Le comité est certainement au courant.
The committee will be aware of the recent amendment to the Official Languages Act, which impacts deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers appointed on the recommendation of the Prime Minister based on advice from the Clerk of the Privy Council. Section 34(2) under Part 5 of the Act requires individuals appointed to a deputy minister position that falls under Schedule 1 of the Financial Administration Act to take the language training that is necessary to be able to speak and understand clearly both official languages. This legislative provision reinforces the terms and conditions of appointment for deputy ministers, which include that they personally promote the use of both official languages in their institutions.
Secretariat supports the Clerk of the Privy Council in overseeing the Deputy Minister community, including ensuring that they are aware of their individual responsibilities under the Official Languages Act. Deputy ministers are often promoted from the assistant deputy minister level within the federal public service and would be subject to valid proficiency levels in their second official language. Les personnes recrutées de l'extérieur de la fonction publique.
Individuals who are recruited from outside the federal public service are made aware of their legislative responsibilities, including with respect to official languages, as part of the terms and conditions of employment. In closing, I'd like to emphasise the Privy Council Office is committed to supporting the Governing Council as it strives to create a community of leaders that is reflective of today's Canada.
We would be pleased to take your questions.
Merci, Madame Amouy. Pour le secrétariat du
Thank you very much for the Treasury Board. I believe now it's Mr. Quell for 5 minutes.
To appear before the committee here today. Je suis accompagné de Karim Adam.
With me today is Karim Adam, as you've said, Director Monitoring and Compliance at the Official Languages Centre of Excellence. Today, in my brief remarks, I would like to provide some key information on the bilingualism of federal government executives. Our two official languages are at the heart of the Canadian identity. They contribute to the values of diversity and inclusion, and bilingualism is a priority for the Government of Canada. One of the reasons that this is a priority is the right of Canadians to receive services from the government in either official language. This is a fundamental right, and our department is committed to ensuring that it is respected. A public service and institutional leadership committed to bilingualism can best meet the needs of Canadians to receive services in both languages.
Federal public servants in bilingual regions for language of work purposes have the right to work in the language of their choice. We are committed to fostering a workplace that is conducive to the use of both English and French. D'ailleurs, la loi modernisée renforce.
Moreover, the Modernised Act strengthens and broadens the Treasury Board Secretariat's monitoring responsibilities in order to improve and maintain federal institutions' compliance with their official languages obligations, including obligations relating to service delivery and communications with the public and those relating to respect for employees' language of work rights.
Executives play a key role in setting the tone for the regular use of both official languages in the workplace. And, as you know, amendments to Part 5 of the Official Languages Act address the bilingual capacity, as we just heard, of deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers, as well as language of work rights of employees in bilingual regions. My colleague from the Privy Council Office has just spoken to that. La responsabilité du secrétariat du Conseil.
The Treasury Board Secretariat's responsibility extends up to the Assistant Deputy Minister level, meaning the level below Deputy Ministers. Most appointments to Deputy Minister positions are made from within the public service, in particular by candidates from the pool of Assistant Deputy Ministers. The Directive on Official Languages for People Management requires that Assistant Deputy Minister positions be designated with a language profile of superior proficiency and that the incumbents of these positions be bilingual at the time of their appointment. Amongst the 6,000 executives, 85%, including assistant deputy ministers, actually meet the requirements for their post, and that was in 2023. If we now look at the situation from an employee's point of view, when there was a survey carried out amongst employees in 2022. 3/4 indicated that senior managers in their department use both official languages in their interactions with employees. Perceptions are very similar between Francophones, lying at 75%, and Anglophones at 76%. So that gives you a quick snapshot of the current situation.
Despite a solid foundation for bilingualism, I would like to stress that official languages do need ongoing support, and that we must be constantly vigilant so that the rights of Canadians and of public servants are respected. Je vais m'arrêter ici, puis la parole.
I'll stop here, and I will give the floor to my colleague from the CBSA. So now Ms. Flowers-Jones says the speaker from the CBSA. Good morning, Mr. Chair, honourable members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Holly Flowers Code, and I am the Vice President of Human Resources at the Canada Border Services Agency and champion of official languages at the agency. The CBSA is the front line of our nation's borders, serving as the face of Canada for many newcomers, international travellers who arrive, and also returning Canadians. However, we are not just the gatekeepers of our borders, we're also the custodians of our country's rich heritage and culture. Our two official languages, English and French, are a central piece of this heritage. They light the heart of what makes us Canadian. Together with the Indigenous languages, they are a powerful symbol of our country's diverse and inclusive society.
Understand and recognize the significance of linguistic duality in defining our national identity, fostering social inclusion, and ensuring effective communication with the public and the clients we serve. As the federal agency with the mandate of protecting our borders and providing integrated border services, we strive to ensure that our services are provided of equal quality in both official languages at all our bilingual ports of entry. Travelers and clients are provided active offers of service to use one of our two official languages when interacting with our border services officers and are able to receive documents in the official language of their choice. Every year, the CBSA serves over 95 million people, and in a 2020 Ipsos poll, 98% of respondents indicated that they receive services in the official language of their choice.
More recently, in the 2023-2024 fiscal year, the CBSA received 35 official language complaints to date, representing almost half of what was received in the prior year. Two-thirds of our complaints come from members of the public and generally concern the lack of an active offer of service or continuity of service in the traveller's preferred official language. As a large organisation that has 135 bilingual points of service, we face challenges when it comes to recruiting and maintaining sufficient bilingual resources for all areas, particularly as some of our ports of entry are in remote regions. To address this, the CBSA has put in place a shift scheduling system with the ability to identify the linguistic profile of employees in order to prioritise the scheduling of bilingual border services officers at ports of entry when required.
Fully bilingual services by telephone for those reaching out to Border Information Services line, at our primary inspection kiosks, on our social media channels, as well as on our external website. Within the agency, we also work to ensure sufficient bilingual capacity across the organization so that employees can work in the official language of their choice in bilingual regions. In the 2020 Public Service Employee Survey, 92% of respondents from the CBSA indicated they could communicate with their immediate supervisor in the official language of their choice. À l'interne, nous avons une école et un programme de formation linguistique spécifique.
Internally, we have a dedicated language training school program, and each year we train between 500 to 800 employees to increase our agency's bilingual capacity. Our commitment does not stop at training. We are continually striving to create a work environment that promotes the use of both English and French. We encourage our employees to use their preferred official language in their workplace and regularly share reminders and implement training requirements so that employees are aware of their official language's obligations.
I'd like to assure the Chair and members of the committee that the CBSA remains dedicated to serving Canadians in the official language of their choice. We are fully committed to upholding the principles of linguistic duality, not as a legal obligation, but also as a vital part of our national identity. I look forward to the discussion and insight today on ways we can further enhance our commitment to promoting and preserving our nation's linguistic heritage. Merci. Je suis heureuse de répondre à vos questions.
Merci, Madame Flowers.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. So everyone stuck to their timing so we can take as many questions as possible, and each a political group will have 6 minutes of questions and answers, and we'll start with the Conservatives. Mr. Gaudin, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for being here today and participating in this exercise. It's very important to mention that to you. We want to improve, and you're the ones who live out the regulations and legislation on a daily basis. So thank you very much for being here. I'll turn to Mr. Quell first of all. I'd like to ask you what has changed Since the adoption of the Official Languages Act in the daily life of workers in bilingualism and the commitment of, or rather the hiring of employees who speak French. Thank you very much for the question. I'd like to answer by saying that our commitment is constant vis-a-vis official languages in terms of public service. No, I don't want to know about your commitment, but I want to know specifically what has changed since Royal Assent was given to C13 that then entered into force. What has changed in your daily lives in the Treasury Board? Well, in our group, that's brought about important changes because we have got new responsibilities now, and I'm going to name two main initiatives underway at the moment. One of these is making of a regulation on Part 7, and that was mentioned in the previous contribution made. So we have regular meetings with the Commissioner of Official Languages and people from the OLMCs to prepare the regulations on Part 7. So that's one initiative that's underway. Then another initiative on which we're working is a framework of responsibilities and accountability, and we're planning to publish that over the summer. And a third initiative that I'd like to mention is the setting up of a new framework on language training. That's a commitment from the government that dates back to 2019 to develop that type of framework to improve the offer of language training for employees. So these are three initiatives that fall under the responsibility of my particular group. Thank you, Mr. Quill. Another question. In your speech, you talked about openness, and you said that 95% of people meet the bilingualism requirements. So how have you carried out that analysis and gathered these data? It's through the centralized HR systems that we do this. So each holder of a bilingual position has to take a test for the centralized public administration that's administered by the Public Service Commission or Board. So when does this evaluation take place? It's during their application process when we're assessing the candidates' suitability for these positions that are covered as imperative staffing. And that's the biggest case. We're talking about imperative staffing. Now, you've been talking about deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers that have to follow training to become more bilingual. What is the method to assess these people now that they've been hired? Well, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague. You're talking about assistant deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers. Yes, that falls under the Treasury Board's responsibilities then. Thank you for that question, Chair. So the deputy ministers and the associate deputy ministers, the big majority of them, come from within the public service context. So they're already subject to certain bilingual level requirements for the position that they held beforehand. And once they take up this new position, the conditions for their appointment mean that personally, they have to promote and respect the use of both official languages within their organizations. I understand that, Ms. Amwi, but I'd like to know what happens for these people who are hired, for example, as a deputy minister or an assistant deputy minister. How are they assessed? Do you leave them free in the system once they're hired? That's it? There's no other assessment? No, there's no centralized assessment. That's correct. Now, do you not think that the bilingualism assessment downstream is too strict or not strict enough or too demanding? So basically, I'd like to know from you whether we should actually increase the criteria in terms of knowledge of French, because in general, that's the most vulnerable language where there's the most problems. So don't you think we should actually increase the level of knowledge when they actually first take up this position?
Monsieur Président.
Mr. Chair, I can't provide my opinion on whether it needs to be increased, the level, or not, but in the Federal Public Service, there is a required bilingualism level that is quite strict in oral and written expression and oral comprehension, and that is expected of deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers. Once they are in these positions with the changes in the Act, they need to take the necessary training to make sure that they understand both official languages. I do understand, Ms. Amoui. Your 6 minutes are up. I know it goes by quickly. Mr. Sanson, for the Liberals, for the next 6 minutes, you have the floor. Thank you. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here as well and helping us better understand where we are and where we are going. Very quickly, Ms. Amoui, I heard that there are fewer appointments, Francophone appointments, over the past years. Is that true? It is exactly for this reason that the Privy Council office is collecting data to see if there are trends. As we speak, when it comes to governor and council appointments in general, I think the current number is 23% of people who identify French as their first official language. And has there been a decrease compared to a couple years ago? The data fluctuates month over month or year over year. Okay, thank you. In connection with C13, the deputy minister and associate deputy minister have to be bilingual. Have there been appointments made or hiring made in line with the new rules, with the changes to the Act, you mean? So deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers have to take the necessary training to make sure that they understand both official language after their nominations, after their appointments, so they can still be appointed even though they're not bilingual right now, even with C13. Yes, okay, that's interesting. Okay, a second question. I'm happy to have representation from the Treasury Board here today, Mr. Coyle, because there was a lady who was here before, and I liked his contributions a lot. So this person was saying that the more we wait to implement C13, the lower the chance that we will really improve the legislation or the practices. Is that the case? I mean, each piece of legislation needs to be implemented as quickly as possible. I agree with that. Having said that, there is a certain procedure for the regulation. I referred to the regulation on Part 7 of the Act, and I was before this committee with the President of the Treasury Board, where she referred to the time it takes, to the deadlines, and implementation should be done after consultation with the stakeholders and the public. Thank you, I understand, and I appreciate your answer. Can we get a sample or an organizational chart of some sort of what needs to be done in the first month, 6 months, and in a year? Of course, implementation takes a certain amount of time. If it's longer than a year, then it starts to worry me, and I've heard rumors that that is the case. And what are some examples of the low-hanging fruit, and what can be done in the first month, 6 months, for the first year, or will it take 2 to 3 years to implement the regulation? We started the regulation drafting procedure. We know the steps to follow. We are in pre-consultation with stakeholders, minority communities, and the Commissioner of Official Languages. The next step will be the presentation of a regulation to the Parliament, which will be studied by your committee, among others. Thank you. I appreciate that. Can we get a flow chart of how things will move forward? I know that Canadian Heritage and yourselves, you work together. and you are jointly responsible for the new act. Where are you on that? I can give you an example. C13 stipulates that the governance will be done by the Treasury Board. Starting from the next fiscal year, the Secretariat of the Treasury Board will be responsible through this committee of a high-level committee on official languages. So we are getting the responsibility from Canadian Heritage. I appreciate your answer. It's not to criticize you or attack you. It is so that all Canadians are able to see what's happening. So can we get another chart for that on the transition and how much more time it will take to finish it? We can definitely provide you with some information on the governance and the transition between the Canadian Heritage and the Treasury Board. You referred to the framework of responsibilities and the report on official languages. Can you please provide us an update on that aspect of things? We can certainly provide information on the framework. We're still developing it, and we can definitely provide information. My concern is that Canadians are asking the question, when will it be done? When will we see the new powers? 10 seconds, Mr. Sanson. When will the Commissioner receive or start exercising the new powers? Thank you, Mr. Sanson. That's an excellent question, but your time is up. That's fine. We're going to the Bloc Québécois. 6 minutes, Mr. Beaulieu. You have the floor. My first question will be for the CBSA. Recently, there was a Bloc Québécois MP who was not able to get services in French from a security agent in Montreal. And had they not been a member of the parliament, I think they would have had a lot of problem. So they insisted, and they were taken in custody, and they missed their trip. So what would you say on problems like that? And this was in Montreal, and you were saying that you're having a hard time finding people, bilingual people, in remote regions, but in Quebec and Montreal, these are not remote regions.
And I'm very sorry to hear that we didn't meet this standard for Canadians, and in particular this traveler. Certainly happy to take the details back. We are committed, and we do have a scheduling system to ensure that we have bilingual capacity at all of our bilingual ports of entry. But from time to time, we have border service officers that would have family emergencies, would be sick. And so we do have backups. We do have phone services to provide when the bilingual capacity cannot be provided at that time. But we are committed and happy to take that away and look at that situation.
I'm happy to hear that you will look into it, but it did not appear to be an exception. The agents were not very happy when they were faced with requests to receive services in French. That was the impression. So there was a lawyer who was prohibited from making their case in French. They were defending their client, and after complaints, they were granted the right, but they refused written submissions in French, but that was then finally accepted. So the CBSA agent, I think, provided a written document, a piece of evidence, but that was then withdrawn. So it seems like there are problems in Montreal with cases like that, and we were told that it was caused, or the underlying cause was with the CBSA. I don't know if you heard about such cases, but in Montreal, it seems that there are many issues, many problems.
Thank you again for the question. Certainly happy to take certain specific situations back to take a look at them. That should not be the case. We do have bilingual capacity at all of our bilingual ports of service, and we have supervisors and we have backup. It doesn't seem that this individual got the service they should have, and that should be corrected.
Bon. Il s'agira de regarder, on a eu un témoin ici.
We had a witness here, an immigration lawyer, who was saying that, and they've been here for 30 years, and they're saying that the situation isn't improving and that it's worsening continuously. So we will see what will happen going forward, but it doesn't look like there will be improvements. I hope that you will carry the message to the agency so that there are improvements. Now, we've also seen recently with appointments to key positions in the government that there has been a new low of when it comes to francophones. There has been fewer appointments, francophone appointments, compared to recent years. How do you explain that? Mr. Chair, the data we collect fluctuate from month to month, from year to year. Just to give you a bit more of a context, we're looking at 2,200 positions that need to be filled in through governor and council appointments, and we do 500 to 800 appointments every year. So every time we make nominations, or appointments rather, the data will vary. We are currently at 23% of individuals appointed through governor and council appointments who identify French as their first spoken official language. And when it comes to leadership positions, we have 31% of people who identify French as their first language. So once again, we'll look at the data. We provide recommendations to decision makers to prevent negative trends. And we're trying to diagnose the situation specifically to understand what's happening. I do understand that you're officials and that you cannot criticize or take political positions, but other stakeholders who are not in your shoes seem to be saying that it's not really great, the situation. So people, I don't know what position this was for specifically, but answering a question by my colleague, you said that people do not need to be bilingual before they're appointed. So some people who don't speak French before their appointments, 15 seconds, who have the skills for, and then they end up receiving training, but it doesn't work out. If you'll allow me to clarify, you have 5 seconds. Well, there are different positions with different criteria. That's what it boils down to. Some positions, people need to be bilingual when they're appointed. In some others, it's not essential, but it's preferred. Okay, thank you very much. Next round of questions, we're going to the NDP. Ms. Ashton, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our witnesses. My first question will be to Mr. Kwal and Mr. Adam. We received a question about the functioning of responsibilities among different departments. What's the difference between the Excellency Center, Center of Excellence of the Treasury Board and the center that is in charge of Part 7 under Canadian Heritage as part of the Action Plan for Official Languages? And will this have an impact on appointments going forward? Thank you. I'll start with the last bit of your question. There will not be an impact on the appointment structure. To answer your question on the difference between the two, at the Treasury Board, we are responsible for the federal institutions. So, for the most part, we are trying to ensure the good functioning of the public service. The Canadian Heritage Centre, on Part 7 of the Act, they focus more on mobilizing information among minority communities. Canadian Heritage also has a responsibility to interface with the provinces and territories. So that is more external facing. But the center that I am in charge of at the Treasury Board, our function is more internal for the public service. Do you think that this might have an impact on appointments in the future? despite this clear distinction? I don't believe so. The Official Languages Center of Excellence, so within our organization, we are responsible for Part 5 of the Act, Language of Work. So we are looking into respecting the language choices of employees and appointments that has to do with the Public Service Commission, but we are checking compliance for the most part. And if I can specify, Mr. Chair, Canadian Heritage Centre, that the centre is focused on Part 7, so that has to do with external stakeholders, and it also has to do with the regulations in connection with Part 7, as my colleague mentioned previously. Thank you. Okay, great. Again, my question to you, the Public Service Alliance of Canada, in negotiations with the Treasury Board, asked for a revision of the bilingualism bonus. They're asking for the bonus to go from $800 to $3,000 in 2024. $800 with the current cost of living isn't really much for many people because people are finding themselves in difficult situations. So would that encourage more bilingual people to join the public service or help others master the 2 official languages? And what do you think about the bonus not having been changed since 1977? And what kind of an impact this would have on a more dynamic public service? Thank you. If you'll allow me, I'll give a bit of some context. So the bonus was introduced in 1977 with the objective of serving as, or rather serving as a tool to encourage bilingual employees. So this is, of course, a different time. Now the directive is the responsibility of the National Joint Committee. Employers and labor unions are represented there. The employer and the labor unions agreed to review the bilingualism bonus as part of the next review, which will start in April. So the bonus was discussed in the past as well, and you heard this from Ms. Tellier as well. In 2002, the Commissioner of Official Languages said that English and French skills should be considered as base skills, similar to other professional skills that are required, and they asked to the bonus to be taken out of the system. And then in 2005, there was another recommendation to abolish the bonus and that the 2 official languages should be taken into account in setting the salary levels of public servants. So just to provide some background on the bonus, but we will look into the bonus once again as part of the negotiations in April. Okay. Well, we hope that there will be some changes in line with what the Public Service Alliance of Canada have been asking for. And, of course, French is on the decline in Canada. We are faced with great challenges when it comes to the number of French speakers throughout the country, and I hope that all the efforts to strengthen the bill, well, rather the Official Languages Act now, will give us the opportunity to revisit some of these elements and, more importantly, to increase this bonus. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Thank you. Thank you. You went beyond your time. Ms. Kuzi, for 5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for being here today. I'm a product of language training in the public service. I arrived here in Ottawa in 2003 as a young girl from Alberta, and I took 15 months of language training, and it was a bit of a nightmare. But I think that back then they used a certain organization that was called CITI in order to provide the language training. So, Mr. Quell, I've got some questions on language training for you. So there seems to be subcontracting of language training within departments rather than creating an internal language training program. Do you think that this subcontracting process has actually led to cost savings, but perhaps lesser quality? I'd like to answer by saying that the way in which departments provide language training is quite variable. There are certain departments, social affairs, natural resources, Health Canada, for example, and I think also the CBSA, who use public servants as language teachers because they've decided that it's more profitable, more beneficial to have a language school, if you like, within their own department. It depends on the size of the department whether they're able to do that, of course. So Public Services and Procurement Canada have set up certain standing offers which allow departments to choose from pre-qualified language schools. So these are basically the two models that exist and are used by departments to make sure that we have correct language training offered to employees. And which verifications or audits have been carried out to make sure that language training maintains the same level of quality throughout the federal public service. So there are these standing offers that I've just mentioned from PSPC. And in these standing offers, there are criteria about the cost and also the quality of the training provided. So providers are assessed to make sure that it's high-quality training. Now, for the internal schools, well, it's the responsibility of the department to make sure that these employees actually provide quality training. I received this question from my colleague, mainly people in certain positions covered under Part 4 of the OLE can actually draw on an exception to official languages, as we see under 34.2 of Part 5 of the OLE. So the point here, for example, I received a bilingualism bonus because I was at level CCC, but it took me 50 months to get there, but I did get there, cheery. But how much of time would it take for people to get this level that's needed for the position, and how is this decided? If we can say that it's acceptable to have someone who would take 2 years to reach the necessary level of this type of position, well, how would that work? Well, it falls to the public service, and it's there under the authority that would give an exemption to the linguistic requirements. Now, the number of positions where there are no linguistic requirements attached are non-imperative positions, and it's quite low. We're just talking about 1 or 2% of the appointments here. But when it's the case, what we do is that we give the employee 2 years to learn their second language. And during this period, the department has to make sure that employees' rights are respected. So we make sure that there should be a colleague that would supervise or rather take up the duties of this employee who's following language training. Sometimes it's a question of taking someone from a level BBB up to CCC. So we're not saying these people are not bilingual, but they need to step up to a higher level of bilingual competence. Thank you. And now Mr. Seri for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses once again for having being here today to help us with this particular situation. First of all, on the basis of the comments that have been received, there needs to be more coordination with language training because we've heard that it doesn't work when it's spread across different departments. So I hope that we're able to improve things and centralize things. And earlier, my young colleague, Mr. Drouin, said that sometimes people are waiting for 10 months to be hired or more for these vacant positions. That's not acceptable. People can find something quicker in the private sector. So we're losing many bilingual young people who decide to go elsewhere because the public service takes too much time to hire them. So you need to improve this. Now, to come back to what Madame Cousy just mentioned, and Section 34. And I'd like to thank Mr. Quill and Mr. Adam for having spent months and months with us on C13. I know it was a very enriching experience for you. You've certainly given us a great deal of inspiration over these months. Now, for the Canadians listening to us today, because our study is concentrating on senior officials in the Treasury Board, and you've mentioned 95% as a figure, and that was mentioned by others. So we have the deputy ministers, and then we've got the assistant deputy ministers, associate deputy ministers, and we've got the directors, and afterwards we've got the managers. So there's 4 levels there. So I'd like to know whether C13 applies to all 4 levels and what are the improvements that have been made in terms of these 4 groups of managers who have to immediately supervise their employees. I'll start off and then I'll give the floor to my colleague. So to try and parse all this out, I know it's complicated. We talk about deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers, and they're named by the Treasury Board. That's under Ms. Amboui's responsibility, so I won't say any more on that. And then when we're talking about the assistant deputy ministers, they are not appointed by the governor in council, so these positions fall under the responsibility of the Treasury Board policies rather than Privy Council. And that's why with these positions, there's a rule that these positions have to be staffed with higher skills and with imperative staffing. And then afterwards, we've got management level positions, the EX, so these executive levels, and below that we have managers. But for all of these different positions that I've just mentioned, under Section 91 of the Act, we have to objectively assess the requirements of the position to determine whether the position is bilingual or not, and if so, at which bilingual level it should be set. And once these people have been appointed, they have to meet the requirements of the position. But perhaps my colleague could respond on the deputy ministers. So for the deputy ministers and the associate deputy ministers, it's a different system. The positions are not described in terms of a linguistic profile. These are people who are appointed by the governor in council, and they have to personally ensure that both official languages are used in their organisation. And with the changes to the Act, the people who are appointed these positions have to take the necessary training to be able to speak and understand both official languages personally, so they can follow training. And I can see that the big majority of deputy ministers are already bilingual. Around 88% of them are already bilingual. And it depends on how many people are promoted through the public service. People come in from outside of the public service also have the same requirement to ensure that both official languages are used and also to follow the necessary required training. So my colleague, Mr. Sanson, would absolutely like to put a last question. 30 seconds. Mr. Adams, I don't want you to feel left out. Now, you're Director of Monitoring and Compliance at the Official Languages Centre of Excellence. What a title. So within 10 or 15 seconds, what's going to change in your role today as a result of C13 compared to the situation last year? Just as a rough outline. That's an excellent question, Mr. Sanson. Well, okay. On you go. Thank you very much, Chair, for that question. Rapidly, it's a new role it's a reinforced and expanded role for the Treasury Board so that there's increased monitoring of the 200 federal institutions we've already got going on this. And also, I don't know if time's going to allow me to explain this, but as well as these new responsibilities that I've just mentioned, there's going to be changes in the annual report when it comes to monitoring of the Parliament. Thank you. That's a very good answer. That's it, Mr. Thompson. So it'd be great to get a report to the committee that explains all that. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Now 2.5 minutes for you. Now, when it comes to official languages policy, all of this is based on the idea of institutional bilingualism and people being able to use the language of their choice. What happens if you have a French-speaking and English-speaking worker and both of them want to speak or work in their own language? What happens then? Well, the manager has to be bilingual. That's the brief answer. But you're not answering my question here. If you've got a person who wants to work in French and the other one wants to work in English, what happens if you've got a manager who wants to work in French and the employee wants to work in English? What happens? That does happen in communications between different regions. And that's when you need to turn to the bilingualism of the people involved. Because even in Quebec, in the public service, there is systemic discrimination. People always presume that everything's going to take place in English. And I think if there's not a model where we actually prefer one language, for example, Hockey Canada bans players from speaking French because in an emergency situation there has to be one single language that we use. I think it's the same thing at all levels. So factually, basically everything happens in English unless there's certain areas where it's really French that's the preferred language. So this model isn't working, basically. Chair. Perhaps I could provide some information in terms of the policies that have already been set up. For example, for Quebec, for the federal institutions, apart from the bilingual regions in the Eastern Townships and Montreal, otherwise the language of work for federal institutions in Quebec is French. So how come officials are saying the opposite? They're saying that a great deal of the work takes place in English when they have meetings, they're held in English and so on. So there is a real issue here. I think it's the basic principle and the Official Languages Act that isn't working because it's French that's always being pushed further down the line. If we have an institutional bilingualism model, it's always the majority language that's going to dominate and that will assimilate the minority languages at the end of the day. Thank you. Perhaps I can cite certain survey results from federal employees from 2022. Unfortunately, time has ran out because we have to leave at 10:15 because another committee is coming in. And I'd like to give some time to Ms. Ashton as well. Please go ahead. Thank you. My first question is for Ms. Hamwi or Ms. Jones. We know that in Section 34 of the Modernisation of the OLA, that it stipulates that any person who's appointed by the Governor in Council as Deputy Minister or Associate Deputy Minister or at an equivalent ministerial level mentioned in Schedule so-and-so, when appointed, they have to take language training so that they can understand and speak clearly in both official languages. So how can you guarantee that this actually happens? And amongst the deputy ministers, how many of them are actually bilingual today? Thank you for that question, Chair. First of all, the clerk of the Privy Council has asked all of the current deputy ministers who already have this position to adhere to these modifications in the Act. If they don't perfectly understand both languages, they have to take training. There has to be an annual report provided by them in their performance evaluation as of next year. And for those who have to follow training, they can work through their department or their organisation to be assessed to see whether they need to take training or not, and if they need to take training to actually follow that training course and then report back on it every year. And amongst the deputy ministers, how many of them are bilingual today? 88% of the deputy ministers self-identify as having at least being functionally bilingual. Is there one way for citizens to actually check whether deputy ministers do speak French, and can they get access to that rate of bilingualism? We can give the rate of bilingualism by individual, of course, well, it's confidential information, but the rate of bilingualism is not public knowledge, but we can certainly give that to you. Now, my last question, Mr. Quill and Mr. Adam. It was mentioned in the Commissioner's report that you need to have a new language training program for employees in the public service. Together with the Office of the Commissioner, where you at with this project, and what are the innovative parts of this program that will make sure that we can ensure bilingualism in an efficient way in the public service? Thank you, but time is really ticking. We have to leave because another committee is coming in. But before we round off, dear witnesses, there have been very relevant questions. We haven't had enough time. It's very difficult for me here to be the hard taskmaster in terms of timing, in particular the questions from Mr. Sanson, Mr. Beaulieu, and the last question from Ms. Ashton. We would really appreciate this, and I would appreciate this as chair, if you could provide us with your answers that you haven't had time to write today. Please send them in before the end of the month. That would give you enough time to do that. Send them in via our clerk, so that these answers can be shared with the committee. And Madame Omi, what does it actually mean, being functionally bilingual? Is it a technical definition? If so, what does that mean? And what are the different tests in order to be functionally bilingual? For example, if you're an Anglophone mother tongue or Francophone mother tongue, and what sort of test do you need to take to be qualified as functionally bilingual? Having said that, thank you very much. Really appreciated that. Sorry that time ran out, and I'd like to round off by saying that when we come back on the 8th of April, we will take up a year that an hour that we missed because of votes. So we will have 1 hour on this study, and then the second hour we'll be giving instructions to the analysts. Have a great week or two in your ridings. We'll work hard, and thank you once again to the witnesses.